Hey guys, it's Khalil,
Hey, it's Chad.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. So starting our whatever part this is of the series, we again, as Chad mentioned in the outro of the last video, are going to be moving finally into the U.S. And it's in how it prioritizes freedom over peace. But we're going to mention at a later point, hopefully near the end of this episode, near the second half, that it actually balances the two quite well. It prioritizes freedom over peace, but it balances it better than probably any other society, you know? So, and then there's actually quite an intellectual and philosophical backing behind that idea. But anyway, um, so in the US, as people who are watching, who are majority, I'd assume, are from the US, would probably know, is that civil and individual rights are as important or more important than social harmony. Social harmony is preferable. It is good to have. It's nice, but at the same time, like you'd want to have social harmony, but you also want it to be lined up with the backbone of rights, of certain freedoms that each individual person and each groups, within the larger society have. So this means the rights of people, religions, businesses, intellectual property, physical property. That's why, like there are certain things that like people and businesses and groups, aren't obligated to disclose to the government, but at the same time, the government, under the Freedom of Information Act, is required to give information to the people. That they are obligated to be somewhat um 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 what's the word I'm looking for? They're always
Oh,
disclosing. They're required to, in a certain extent, disclose information about the government to its people.
yeah,
So it's about a certain amount of transparency between the people and the government that you do not have in China.
yeah. I mean, and one of a great example of just how freedom is valued is just the whole way that our whole system is set up. Federalism, in which the central United States government has its roles, and then the laws that it can do, and then the states have the roles and the laws that it can do. With our 10th Amendment, we have it so that the responsibilities and the duties of the United States government, of Congress, the president, all of that, that are specifically enumerated in the Constitution are delegated to the United States government. But everything else, um, in an ideal sense, are guaranteed for the states to figure out for themselves. And we've seen this. It has kind of ebbed and flowed on how much the states can have a right to do whatever it is. We've had, in the 1960s, states' rights to enforce discrimination based on race. That was taken away with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because it violated another amendment. But then you have even more current events, such as um, the removal of Roe v. Wade, in which it is now up to the states to decide how and if they were to provide abortion care. And because once again, that was something that was it was a responsibility given to the federal government, by the 1973 Roe v. Wade court case. However, it was given back to the states very recently in the Jackson v. Dobbs, I believe, case. And so, yeah, just the whole idea of federalism itself, which is one of the basis of how our government is formed, is one of the ways that just emphasizes how much freedoms are valued. We don't have a government that manages every single little thing that every state, every county, every city enforces. We give autonomy to our states, to our counties, to our cities, in which they could do things that both um, they want to do that may or may not align with this current government or their politics, or they could fall in line, and that's their choice for to a great extent. And so yeah, this whole idea is one way that we keep freedom when it comes to these kind of large level decisions, in a big contrast to China, which we just described in the last episode. It's a great example of how we do that on the grand institutional level.
Right, because in America, did you have anything?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, it because it's good that in America, people are skeptical of their government. It often, you could actually look at it in a historical sense, as being what stopped our country from falling to totalitarianism at moments when in many other countries in the world, many of our allies, um, many of our many of our economic peers even, and military peers had fallen to totalitarianism and fascism even, whether it be France nearly falling to fascism in the 30s, or the rise of nationalism in the 20s and 30s, amongst many nations in Europe, but then also, of course, not just Europe, as we also saw it in Japan. And we're seeing it now in many other different countries, including China, in India, as we mentioned in our ethno-nationalism series, as well as Turkey, Hungary, and even Poland, with a certain sense of nationalism coming from over there as well. America is built off of a hands-off government, a government that provided things for the people, as we mentioned, like that we cannot live without our government. People don't understand how much we lose without our government, but it's not so big that it's impacting our lives. I could say kill President Biden in like the Secret Service squads, like FBI, CIA won't be coming over my doorstep right now, because I'm not so much of a threat to the state that I would do that, because America is inherently secure in that sense, in a different way that China is, in a much more secure fashion than China is, because it like you can criticize the government, you can suggest that it be better, which brings forth a certain sense of patriotism, because everyone knows that they can do their own little bit to make their lives better, to make their children's lives better, to make their grandchildren's lives better, to make their friends, their family members' lives better, you know, because we have the ability to change. In China and in other societies that are authoritarian, totalitarian based, that are under the guise of socialism, that are accepting much more nationalism, but are like formally a liberal democracy. In America, we have the ability to change, and our nationalism isn't getting in our way of getting things done. That's the big difference between America and places like China, which is our biggest geopolitical rival as Americans at the moment. Um, you look at the comparison between the two nations, and in America, we are able to change, and everyone knows, each person knows in the country that they not only have a right, they have a responsibility to make that change, to make their lives better, their family lives better, their friends' lives better, their um, and really do justice to their ancestors even. Black people, for example, we have a right today to maintain and keep our rights, and to increase the quality of life for our people, because our great grandparents, did not have that. you know in China, you have a certain sense of priority, so and that's what really keeps the certain amount of social harmony that you have in America from it keeps it holding up, because everyone knows that they have to like add the brick to the foundation, to help it build up. Everyone knows their responsibility.
Yeah, we have the freedom to change our government. We have the freedom to speak out against it. We have the freedom to protest and to point out the things that are wrong and the things that need to be better. In China, that's not the case. What we just described in our last episode with the social credit system, it's a system in order to coerce or manipulate the populace into basically going with the flow, going with the current system and to a certain extent, morals of the party, the Communist Party of China, and basically in contrast to the freedom of whatever belief you may have in your government. In China, you have that system which essentially coerces people to going along with those morals, and you don't really have a choice, because if you go against it, not only are you going to get penalized, say financially, you may get penalized, um, even worse, physically, you might go to jail or anything like that. United States, you don't have that for the most part. You have the ability to make changes, to speak out against our government. And so, like we said, that inspires a lot of patriotism and support for the country that isn't coerced. It's not forced. It's not um, incentivized through monetary, stipends or anything like that. It's in some parts, it's kind of grassrooted because people believe that we have the ability to change our government, to change the things that we find wrong, to improve our lives, to improve the lives of our children, because we have the freedom to do so. In places like China, that's not really the case. Sure, you can make your family and your lives better, but you're not really going to have the chance to make your country better unless you were just going through the party or anything like that. And you wouldn't have the idea to make your country better because it's great enough as it is. I'm sure that would be the sentiment that you would get from over there. Um, but yeah, that's again another core difference that we have is we have the freedom to make changes, and it's a very inspiring thing. And personally, it's a reason that I believe the United States has existed for our 246 years, is that belief that we can make change, and that belief in our government that's kept us going. And all of that again is rooted in our freedom to believe so.
Right. So as we compare the US and China, it's important to keep in mind, what we really think the US balances. It balances freedom, which to its fullest extent, as we've mentioned in some, no security, no law, which brings ultimate violence, war, and loss. And it also balances peace, which in its fullest extent itself has no freedom, no rights, no happiness, totalitarian control, and that peace is reigned and gained through fear, as we see with very, very with as much resource and capability as we were able to pull with that last episode on China and the last couple episodes on China, and so um, throughout history, throughout written history and history that we know of today, there has always been an attempt at balancing these two. And we believe, we're just going to say it now, as we'll continue to say it over the rest of this series, that we think America best balances it than any other system ever.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And so one of the ways that we really do that is an idea that's evolved from different philosophers such as Rousseau and John Locke, of the idea of this social contract. So the social contract, which we described in previous episodes as well as previous series, is the idea that we lend some of our freedoms to a government in exchange that they protect or they give us back something. For philosophers such as John Locke, what is hoped is given back to the citizens is a sense of freedom, of individual rights. John Locke had the idea that people were enumerated with natural rights, and these rights were life, liberty, and property. And so, in an ideal sense, for a government that John Locke would support, if that government was to protect these individual rights of life, liberty, and property, then that government is legitimate, it's supportive, it's a just government. Because that's one that you're willing to give up some of your freedoms for, as long as that government is to protect the rest of those. Um, in the book that we like to reference a lot on politics by Alan Ryan, we had um, another summary of how Locke would view this relationship of the individual and the government. And so, quote, Locke's account suggests something closer to the relationship of an employer and employee. The people never wholly relinquishes its authority. We, the people, employ our rulers on whatever terms we rationally choose. If they fail to do their job, we could dismiss them. We do not contract with our rulers. We trust with them the powers they need to serve the functions they are to serve. End quote. Um, so once again, what you get the idea is we have a government, and we give to it the powers that it has, the powers to wage war, to make treaties, to do this, to do the things that, the individual or just the common man, of course, isn't going to be able to do or doesn't really want to do. So we give it the authority that it has, and that's in exchange that it gives us something back. In the relationship of an employer and employee, we give the authority to the employer as long as we know we have the job, we get the payment, we get the experience or the networks or all that kind of things that we would get from a job that we would have. And say we didn't have that, if that employer wasn't to give us these wages or the experience or anything that we didn't want, we could quit. Or in some cases, we could try to get that employer out of the office. And that's in his point of view. This is how we would treat government. We enter in it a contract in which we give it its authority. First of all, we created a government. We give the people and we respect the authority of the people who we appoint like up there to lead us. If we didn't, we could just take them out, first of all, or we could just not follow their laws. There's nothing besides violence that would really stop us from just not following those laws. And even to a certain extent, violence won't always get someone to surrender. And that's, again, an idea that we talked about in previous episodes. But once again, we enter this contract with the government because we give it this authority. And so as long as it gives us back the protection of, in this case, our natural rights, just as an employer would give us a wage in a working job. We give something and we get a little back. And as long as that's the case, that's a legitimate government.
Yeah, one thing to notice about Locke's account as it is described by Alan Ryan is that he recognizes the importance of a state remaining in its existence. He is different than anarchists, of a later era with Makhno, in the Makhno-Shina, um, the Ukrainian anarchist state, post World War I, or when the Baltic Rus expelled the Vikings out of their land in the 860s. They're different in the sense that Locke recognizes the importance of having a stabilizing force in a society, but he says that it must be conditional. And that's why Allen in page 489 on a similar account, he says, quote, government possesses authority only within constitutional bounds. If it exceeds those bounds, it is declared war on its citizens, and they may resist. Not only they may resist, they may have every right to reconstitute the government as they choose to secure constitutional government in the future, end quote. So Locke recognizes the importance of having a state as a stabilizing force, to do the things that, without a government, we would not be able to as effectively do, to bring in trade items from a faraway place that we would have to go thousands of miles to get from, to have the benefits of a wider globalized world. That is what a state helps to provide. And as time has gone on throughout history, the role of a state to help improve our quality of life, just under the condition that we get a job and we contribute to the state economy, in most cases, that we can get the benefits of society. It's just that if they become tyrannical, if they go beyond the constitutional bounds, if they infringe upon our freedom, and they get in the way of us, then we get to show them down. If government was like a person, it'd be like some guy that, like, some person that we could just like throw up there, make them do what we want to do, make them do what, like, everything that helps us. But if they try to stretch out their arms a little bit, we kill them, or we push them off, and that's a sort of arrangement, that liberal societies have with government. And I'd say it's actually very effective, because if you don't push away a government, if you don't like kill it off, and replace it with a new person, just how we did with Trump back in 2020, then they can get way too powerful. So with Locke, you have the greatest contrast as we're about to have with Hobbes, and that is you can revolt when they disturb the freedom. So anyway, Chad, do you have anything to say about especially my comment on Trump?
Yeah, it's again, it just undermines the importance of this social contract in that if it's violated, then we have every right to say revolt. He described it as revolting, but in this day and age, we see it as voting. We have the ability to throw out an entire government if they don't do what we want. If we have a president that we don't like, say you didn't like President Trump, just vote him out of office and he's gone, and then hopefully wouldn't be able to run again. We have that ability in which if a government doesn't do what we want, we could kick them out. Like I said, it's like that employer-employee relationship, but look at it in a different way. The government are our employees. We gave them this authority, we gave them this power, and so if we don't like what they're doing, we could just fire them, get a whole new set. And that's, again, so much more different than what you would get in authoritarian states like China. First of all, you can't be able to say that you didn't like the current government. You would probably get arrested, sent to some prison. You can't protest. You can't have any other outside thought or express that. Here, you have the ability to do all that and to take action about it. And once again, that's one of the greatest things that we have with this liberal system that we have in the United States is the ability to throw out a government we don't want and to a certain extent without violent means and replace it with another government that, once again, has the power that we give them. And so if we don't like them, again, kick them out. And yeah, we can continue on the contrast.
And that's why it was so shocking with Trump, just to cover that real quick, is that he was disrupting the idea that we could replace a government that the people decide is not acting in its favor. He used violent means, and violence, was is never supposed to be used in a democratic process. But and you'll find this out in the next few months if you guys are watching as this releases, you might find in the next few months that Trump actually did orchestrate January 6th. And so he used violent means to gain back the power that the people already pushed him out of. So anyway, that's really the significance of Trump. If anybody, might not have thought about it in such terms. So anyway, Thomas Hobbes is the common like contrast with Locke, with his piece, his very common, very 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 popular piece called Leviathan. And Alan Ryan, he describes, his analysis of Hobbes's theory in Leviathan that, quote, the question of when a man was free to take on new allegiances, if not explicitly released by the person to whom he had sworn allegiance before, was not easy, but Hobbes provided a clear answer. Once we have pledged allegiance to a government, be it monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, we are obliged to obey it and help sustain its authority. A sovereign political entity exists to secure the safety of its subjects, and it can do so only if everyone upholds its authority. If in spite of our efforts in civil strife, we may submit to a new sovereign. No sovereign is truly a sovereign who cannot preserve the lives of his subjects. End quote. So that really, helps to look at the idea that if, let's say, your government, whether it be a monarchy, aristocracy, or democracy, and I'll admit, when I was picking out this quote for the series, I did not notice that he actually included democracy as a possible contender for this, but I guess Hobbes was looking at it through that sense too, that even if the system in place is a democracy, if it doesn't preserve your life, let's say in some existential fight against some other state in a war, then or some civil war between some anti-authority like opposition forces, which ideally under Hobbes would never have existed. But let's say another nation declared war upon your state, and your state lost that war. It is your duty as a citizen to submit to the new power because Hobbes was very focused on peace. You know, He did not want any disruption to the social order, and he believed that constant like insurgency against a new government was going to cause more chaos, more death, and he was not about that. He did not like the idea of resistance. He thought the idea of resistance was simply up to the defending organized force of the previously existing authority, not for the people. The people were like the people, according to the social contract that of his view of the social contract, was that they were supposed to just, do what the government wants them to do. But if the government isn't strong enough to defend itself, then who cares what they want? Submit to the new guy.
Yeah, it's as if this contract to one authority is one permanent and then also eligible for just any authority in general. If you just submit to whatever that government is, if it's a king or if it's the president, then that's forever. You're always just obligated to follow that, do whatever they want. If they lose, too bad. You're with the next guy. And so with Hobbes's social contract, once again, all you see is you obey that government as long as they secure your safety, your peace, your security. Unless they get, unless that's violated, unless your territory has been taken over by the opposing force and the government couldn't stop it or retake it, you are supposed to just follow along with that. If they violate that, then you are with your full hands able to revolt and overthrow that government. Because to Hobbes, that's all that matters. Compare that to Locke. What he had is what was important was those natural rights, those freedoms that you as an individual to have life, liberty, and property. For Locke, once again, if the government violated those, then you're free to go take down the government. And those are a much, much, much broader sense of what you can overthrow or what you can replace a government for. Those could be very broad. That could be something as if your taxes are so high that you can't buy a house. That's something you could go replace the government for because it's violating your right to property. Um, if a law infringes on your freedom to exercise your religion, that's something you replace a government for because it violates your natural right of liberty, of freedom. And so these are very, very broad things, and that's why if you compare it to Hobbes, Locke's contract is one that's kind of, I would say, I can't really call it flimsy, but it's a lot less stringent and it's a lot less permanent than what you could basically call Hobbes. Hobbes is you sign it and that's for life. As long as that government keeps you living, you're with it. And that doesn't care what government it is. For Locke, as long as they keep those rights, if they violate any of those, then you could throw them out. And that could be a various amount of things. But yeah, for Hobbes, very permanent, and especially when you look at it at the contract sense. And so you get that huge contrast. And you could see this as an idea that's really reflected in societies such as China, in that as long as the CCP is going to secure social harmony, a sense of stability in the country, then that any authority that they have is absolutely sovereign, absolutely legitimate, because they're keeping that peace. They're keeping that stability. You don't have to worry about being invaded. You don't have to be worried about terrorists going and blowing up your house because the government couldn't put them down. That security is the most important. So if you look at Hobbes' social contract, that's probably one that the Communist Party in China would probably agree with. If they were to keep that peace, that's the done deal. If you ask Locke, it's a much, much different story.
Right. Of course. And it's best simplified as like Locke, you revolt when they disturb the freedom. Hobbes, you revolt when they disturb the peace. It's that simple. Hobbes, he has the contract. He has his own idea of the contract, and where as long as the government's able to defend itself from external or even internal threats, then you are stuck with it even if it exists for the next 1,000 years in its current format, you are stuck with it. You are born in it and you're going to die in it. And you can't do nothing because you have to accept the things that it's doing for you, but then ignore the things it isn't doing for you.
Yeah, you signed the contract. There's no backing out.
Exactly. So, With Locke, he formed much of the basis of the U.S. government. That's why um, well, I guess, Chad, you can go into much more of the details of this, but like big documents like the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. version of the Bill of Rights or much of the amendments in the U.S. Constitution,
Yeah.
they are all based off of Lockean ideas and not exclusively Locke, other Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau and others, throughout the Enlightenment era from the 16, 1700s, and even the 1800s as more amendments were being written out.
Yeah. And as I said, it greatly influenced the United States is in like the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, when describing the writing of that, commented that all its authority rests on harmonizing the harmonizing sentiments of the day, taken from, quote, the elementary books of public right, such as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. And so once again, and then later on, another idea of like prominent American people who would take upon this idea of Locke were the anti-federalists who, around the forming of the Constitution, were disappointed that it didn't have a Bill of Rights, which would, include the idea of free speech, free religion, all that kind of stuff. They lamented, one of them, Richard Henry Lee, wrote that, quote, there are certain unalienable and fundamental rights which, in forming the social contract, hint, hint, Locke, ought to be explicitly ascertained and fixed, end quote. And once again, you see those words of Locke, life, liberty, property, directly included in the Declaration of Independence, but changed around a bit. Instead of property, it was the pursuit of happiness, because the government wasn't so sure about giving houses to people like slaves. They changed a little bit, but it greatly influenced our system, um, as well as just how the United States would be as a form of government. And so, yeah, we get into this idea of this sort of social contract in which we give our peace, we give some of our no, we give some of our peace, our freedom, to a government that ensures peace, as long as that government still gives us back a little bit of that freedom in a Lockean sort of government, in the United States sort of government, in a liberal sort. And so this is where we kind of get to a balancing point in which the ideas of peace and freedom get to be put on somewhat of the same page. In this social contract, as we described, you get peace from that government who protects you from war, and you get freedom from that government once again, who gives you individual rights and ways to express yourself. You end up getting both. In the liberal sense of government, it seems to do a pretty well job of balancing these two ideas, wouldn't you think?
I actually would say so, of
Yeah.
course, because like the US style of government, which is, you know, arguably with Britain, but US definitely much more so because even in, the late 1700s and early 1800s, a higher population of the citizens of the state, a higher population of the people living within the country were citizens, one, but then those citizens, a higher population among them, even in America in the late 1700s, you know, was included more people into the electorate, into people that helped to elect public officials into office, that helped guide policy of the state. Um, and, for all the reasons that we'd mentioned up until this point, with the 8 or 9 episodes we'd had about this point, liberal democracy, in general, not just the US system, but liberal democracy in general, of which the US government and the US system, gets so much of its motivation from. You know, it is really the best balance between peace and freedom, and that's why I think it's the system that's going to last. So anyway, um, um, that's our episode so far today, and we'll get back to you on with more evidence, with more justification, and more reasoning for why liberal democracy is the best balance. So anyway, we are the Marshals of Truth. We're running short on time. We'll catch you on next time.